So for those who don't know, I started playing the Life is Strange franchise this year. It was back starting in April, and I've just been chipping away at all these games. And it was just completely incidental that a new one came out this year. Came out a few days ago. I beat that last night. And I just wanted to reflect on my time with this franchise. It's become one of my favorite franchises of all time for sure. As you can see on the bottom there, it's mostly in chronological order, and we're doing the full releases. Like, there's bonus episodes as DLC. There's that demo for Life is Strange 2. I'm just gonna talk about it all together, just as a complete package. There's no spoilers for any of these games. I don't need spoilers to convey how I feel, and I just want this to be as beginner friendly as possible. And the truth is, a small minority of people have played all of these games I'm talking about, so I don't want to have to make people feel like they can't watch this. I gotta give a quick shout out to the community for Life is Strange. As much as I love this franchise, and I'm just so happy I got into it this year, especially with, the recent change in my identity. It's been very helpful, it's been so fruitful, so fulfilling. But I have to say, none of that was in any part thanks to the fandom, because I'm talking about the bad apples, of course, the bad faith arguments that you might see. This it was pretty weird when I first was wanting to get into this. I had no idea about any of these games, and I was looking up opinions. I was looking up, which one should I play first, or does it really matter? That's when I really saw a lot of strong opinions, a lot of people just very passionate about certain things, but again, not the average fan. We're not judging the average fan. I know a lot of Life is Strange fans, actually, and they're all chill. We're all cool, but when it comes to online discourse, there are some trends. I'm talking about the people who think Life is Strange 1 is far better, far higher than any other Life is Strange game. I'm talking about the people who just base their entire happiness on whether or not Max and Chloe are canon and get to live happily ever after. I'm talking about the people, when the development team switched over from Don't Nod to Deck 9, just instant pessimism. Instant pessimism for Deck 9. Also, with the recent game Double Exposure, I am especially talking about the people who, when it was revealed, they looked at Max and they were very upset because her appearance did not match whatever appearance that they had concocted in their fanfiction brain. So there's a lot of those types of fans out there, and if you are one of them, you are not going to enjoy watching this. I want to leave a little bit of a teaser, a little bit of a carrot dangling in your face, because I'm sure most people want to know my thoughts on the newest game, Double Exposure. All I'll do for now is that I will place it where I think it belongs, starting this off hot. We're putting it in D tier, the lowest tier. And if you want to know why, you'll have to stick around until the end. You'll have to stay tuned, okay? But just know that's your little sneak peek about how this journey has ended for me. But let's talk about not really how it started for me. I played True Colors first, but how it started for most people is the first game, obviously. The first game is the most popular. It's the most impactful culturally. Pretty much everyone who has beaten it agrees that it's fantastic. It's like, what else can I say? There's not that many cons, but the one thing I think, especially as time goes on, is that the dialogue is a little bit outdated at times. Honestly, I think even at the time of its release, it feels just a little cringe, we'll say, sometimes. It has that effect, how adults think teenagers speak. I compare it to a Teen Nick show, for those of you who watched Nickelodeon back in the day, and they had those live action shows starring teenagers, and they kind of talk like that, where they have to have some sort of slang every other sentence. You get some of that in Life is Strange 1. I mean, you get it in all the Life is Strange games, but especially Life is Strange 1. Chloe, I think, is the biggest victim of it, where she's the rebellious teenage tomboy, right? So they give her dialogue that's very on the nose. Like, oh yeah, this is definitely how rebellious teenagers speak. Also, I was very vocal about this during my playthrough. I streamed all these games, or most of them, on Twitch. I was very vocal about the fact that I hated this school. And I hated Arcadia Bay. There's just so much, just a lot of toxic people, high school drama that's exhausting. It's supposed to feel that way. It's not really a con, it's not a negative. It's supposed to feel that way. You know, Max is this ostracized student, doesn't really fit in with a lot of the kids there. Yeah, I would say I actually hated most of the characters for a good while. Is a testament to how well the story is written, because even though I hated them, I was still invested in the story, and then by the ends, I end up growing attached to a lot of them. So, also, last thing I'll say, which might be a hot take, I think this has the weakest soundtrack of all the games. I know a lot of people love the soundtrack, but just for my music tastes, I don't see myself going back to Life is Strange 1's soundtrack. Even when I played the game, it didn't really add as much as some of the other games did. The only song I really love is the first song that plays when Max leaves the classroom and she's walking through the hall. I thought that was an awesome opening credits. But aside from that, I'm not the biggest fan of the soundtrack compared to the others, at least. This should go in at least S tier. Even today, it feels unique. That's one thing that really impressed me. There's not that many games. The rewind mechanic specifically, I still don't see that many games tackle that, at least in the way that this game does in both its story and its gameplay. Like, you can't have this game without that. They did a good job making the characters feel nuanced. I didn't hate them because, oh, they're just like obviously despicable people, besides, you know, a few of the bullies and all that, but they had a good job of like eventually turning the tides where you start to see their perspective. It's not like this huge shift. When I say redemption arc, it's not like their personality changes. Oh yeah, that just redeemed every bad thing you did. It's more so that you just start to understand them more. And that just feels a lot more realistic in terms of a redemption arc for a story. I would agree with the common consensus. I just think this is one of the best stories I've ever experienced in a video game. The way it escalates is so freaking crazy. You never expect it to go that way. They do a good job of escalating every episode. Like, you think, oh, it's like this high school drama, this Degrassi-ass game in episode 1, but then it just keeps on going. It keeps on going, even when you think that you finally like had enough. Nope, it just keeps on going. And the mystery pays off in a very satisfying way. The themes of this game, too, really hit me hard. When you have this just insane rewinding, time travel, increasingly dark mystery, it's nice that the theme persistently is relatable. At least that I took away that affected me was just the theme of like learning to let go or just not wanting to let go, and then like having these past regrets. You just feel like you have to redeem yourself. You feel like you have to correct that. But sometimes those regrets, we just gotta move on. And I think the way they explored that, especially with the decisions you have to make, considering the fact it's the first one, just an exceptional game. It's definitely worth the hype in my opinion, as long as you can get past some of the outdated elements of the writing. This is where it gets a little divisive, like literally. Life is Strange 2 was developed by the developers of the first game, but the IP was transitioning to Deck 9. They would become the new developers, and they did Life is Strange Before the Storm, which is a prequel to the first game. And because of that, I feel like, at least from what I've seen, it's the second most talked about Life is Strange. It shouldn't be that surprising. I have seen some divisive opinions about it. I couldn't really get a true sense of what the general consensus was. I would assume most people at least think it's pleasant, that it's good. I wouldn't say it's bad by any means. But some people were definitely disappointed because, you know, the first game was so strong. Ideally, you want to follow up with something around that level. Before the Storm is definitely not at that level or around it. And, you know, I think about another prequel, which should be very familiar to people who know me. Xenoblade 2 had a prequel called Torna. But that was different because that was an event in the game, in the base game, that was so significant that it made you want to know about it so bad. And you knew it was going to be impactful no matter what. You were fully confident because it affected the base game so much. And so when you played Torna and you witnessed all that, it was just pretty much an ideal prequel. This is different though because, yes, there are some questions that are worth exploring involving Rachel. It doesn't really have the same impact because, in fact, it's kind of a detriment, at least for me, because a lot of the game feels just a little bit inconsequential. Yeah, let's learn about these characters, but we have to have these decisions because that's what every Life is Strange does. We have to have these decisions, but do these decisions really matter? Because we know it's just going to end up how it ends up in Life is Strange 1. So, for example, you can kind of influence the relationship between Chloe, who's the playable character this time. You can influence the relationship between her and her parents. No matter what, it's going to end up how it does in Life is Strange 1. So why should I care that much? Why should I feel so attached? Like, you can't trick me. I know what's going to happen. The story, like I said, not anywhere near the level. It's alright. It's the most straightforward of all these games, which isn't bad. It is objectively the shortest as well. Speaking of straightforward, there's this like metaphor that has to do with the forest fire and all that. But they make sure to explain it. They did not have to explain it. It's just what I mean by them being a lot more straightforward, a lot more on the nose, not nearly as nuanced as the original game. So there's some trauma with Chloe's dad. That's not a spoiler. And the way they portray it, I feel like is kind of unintentionally funny. Like, there's these dream sequences. I guess they were trying to go for, like, jump scare, like, trippy dream sequence. But I don't know. To me, it kind of came off... unintentionally funny. Like, it didn't need to play off like that. Just to give another example. There's also a part that involves drugging someone, specifically a girl. And then, like, it's supposed to be played off like this humorous thing. And, like, nobody cares in the scene. They don't care about that girl. Just a lot of this stuff is weird in this game. Like I said, you are playing as Chloe. And unfortunately, the last negative I have to say is that Chloe does not have any supernatural powers. So the main gameplay mechanic is the back-talking mechanic. A variation of, like, a quick time event, but with dialogue options. And it can be fun. It's not a bad mechanic by any means, but, you know, when you're comparing it to all these supernatural powers, yeah, it's just kind of meant to be not as interesting. Maybe could have found a better idea, or at least used it more. That being said, though, I don't want to seem too harsh on it. The biggest positive I can say about Before the Storm is Chloe. Chloe was a character, as I mentioned, I did not love at first, but this game specifically was where I started to really love Chloe. She grew on me so much in this game. I think a big reason for it is because you see a different side of her that you don't see as much in the first game. Like, I'll be honest, when this game started, it starts off with Chloe having that dialogue I mentioned where, you know, she has to swear a lot, she has to say slang. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this being the protagonist. But then, she's pretty much outdone by Rachel. Rachel and Chloe have such a really likable dynamic. Because here you have this rebellious teenager. And now all of a sudden, they've met someone who is definitely more unhinged than them. And so seeing how Chloe reacts to that is very endearing. Because of that, I honestly think Chloe is my second favorite protagonist. I like playing as Chloe more than Max. I'll be honest. This is you know, don't tell the internet this. But if Rachel wasn't such a homewrecker, I would ship her and Chloe. I really enjoyed the dynamic between them. Like I said, they have a lot of chemistry, a lot of intimacy, and most of all, this is the most explicitly. This is the most explicitly queer Life is Strange game. Technically, you don't have to romance Rachel, but a lot of those scenes, it's like, come on. It's like, come on now. Especially that scene when they're at night on the street. That scene is one of my favorites. I just enjoyed it so much, even though I didn't love the story. The vibes were there, man. When it comes to the vibe meter, this is like top 3 in the Life is Strange franchise for me. I think about another example is the, I think it was a chapter 3 opening. Chloe enters Rachel's room, and that's like the opening credits. Just the vibes. Off the charts with Before the Storm. The licensed tracks, too. I really enjoyed a lot of them. The credits theme, I'm a big fan of. I listen to it a lot. And it brings back really warm memories of this game. just the lightheartedness, the fun vibes, is there's an optional tabletop RPG sequence of events that you can trigger here with Steph, who became a fan favorite character, so that's cool. I mean, it's called Before the Storm. You can think of it as the calm before the storm, right? When you look at it that way, even the story having its weaknesses, it becomes a minor gripe in the grand scheme of things. It's just fun to be Chloe and hang out with Rachel and all the hijinks and just getting to learn more about them. It's just fun, plain and simple. I'll put it an A for now. I might bump it down, though. I'm starting to think I didn't need this many tiers. Most of this is chronological. We're breaking that rule one time for Life is Strange Remastered Collection, whatever they called it. I did not play this myself, but based on pretty much what everyone says about it, it is incredibly buggy. I'm sure it's a little better now, but it should not have come out in the state that it did. It's just a bad look when you have these two iconic games. You bundle them together, sounds like a dream come true, and then you just really miss on the most important part of a video game, and that is being able to play it. Being able to be immersed, especially in these immersive narrative-driven games. So I'm going to put that at the bottom in D tier. Let's move on to the game that I'm actually most interested in talking about, and that is Life is Strange 2. Somehow, some way, I just knew nothing about Life is Strange 2. I knew a little bit. I knew bits and pieces about the other games. But Life is Strange 2, somehow I just didn't hear about anything. I've seen people online, hell, I know friends who have played the first game, but they never played the second game. And yeah, it's not so directly connected. There are references in there, but it's not essential to play after the first game. But it is surprising because it is called Life is Strange 2. Now that I have played it, now that I know what it is, I can see why. I can see why it's not as popular. I mean, it is held in high regard by those who have beaten it, but at first glance, I do think it raises some, we'll call them red flags for a lot of people. First of all, it's a very different structure. The other games, they're all based on this central hub. It focuses on one setting, one community. Life is Strange 2 is more of a road trip, so you don't really get to feel nearly as attached to a community as you would the other games. And that's a big part of Life is Strange, so I can see why that would turn off people for Life is Strange 2. The biggest thing I would say about it, though, well, two things as well. I was talking about how Before the Storm is the most explicitly queer. I would say Life is Strange 2 is the least explicitly queer. There are bi-romance options in Life is Strange 2, but they're pretty later on in the game, and it's, like, very minor. So if you're, like, very excited about Life is Strange, for feeling empowered for being queer, you won't really feel that way much for Life is Strange 2. Going on to the second thing, which is the biggest thing in my opinion, it's just really the premise of the game. You're playing as two Mexican boys who are trying to cross the border. And already with that simple statement, so many people are just not gonna be interested. There's this conversation that's pretty annoying about politics in video games. Life is Strange has always had that, right? But not nearly as much as this game. Like, this game, it's just right in your face with the politics. It's right in your face with just the racial injustice and just a lot of heavy topics, a lot of topics that are a little too real. Gamers don't want to feel like real life matters sometimes. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that many people are just not going to be interested in Life is Strange 2 because it's going to remind them of how sad real life is. A lot of people play games to escape. This was not going to be their escape. So, for a lot of reasons like that, I can see why this game just wasn't meant to be as popular. But I respect it. I respect the hell out of it. I respect it when any sort of creator takes a risk and just says, you know what, I know a lot of people won't vibe with this, but this is the story I want to tell. And you can feel it. This was the story they wanted to tell. If you had to play this on release, I feel bad for you. That's another reason. Because you had to wait over a year for the story to finally finish. This was back in the day where it was actually episodic. You'd have to wait for each episode. It was the same thing, but a lot longer. A much longer duration of time until you can finally finish this story. It's a story about two brothers, big brother, little brother, young adults, maybe, I forget how old, it's Sean and Daniel, I forget how old Daniel is, maybe like 11 or something. My biggest complaint, sometimes the plot relies a little bit too heavily on Daniel messing up. And here's the thing, you could say Daniel's another reason why a lot of people won't like this game. A lot of people do not like having this travel companion who's a little kid. A lot of people don't like little kids in general. I mean, in real life and also especially in fiction. Like, if you're a little kid, if you are a little kid in a video game and you aren't unrealistically cool or unrealistically adorable, wholesome, then people are gonna hate you. He is obnoxious. He does mess up. But he's a kid. That's how it should be. It would be bad writing if that wasn't true. However, it does get a little much in certain points in the story where it feels like everything's okay until Daniel messes up. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but I can see why it might rub some people the wrong way. It does give the vibe of your choices not mattering. They do matter. They actually matter a lot more than I thought they would. But it gives the vibe that they don't because of Daniel having to mess up for the story. And also just this kind of lingering feeling of dread. It's like watching a car crash sometimes, and you can't do anything about it. I don't think any episode is bad, but I think 3 and 4 definitely were like the lowest moments for me. I enjoyed them, but it's like the biggest example of what I'm talking about. And also, episode 4 has a really interesting premise. It has so much potential to it, but then it kind of ends in a cliche, corny way. So there are beats here and there that's, even outside of the whole Daniel thing, it could have been a lot better, for sure. Another negative, which might be a hot take, because I know a lot of people love this, but there's a demo for this game called The Awesome Adventures, The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit. It's this very wholesome, but also sad. It's like wholesome on the surface, but then you just peel it away and see that sadness. I'm not saying it was bad, but I feel like it was overhyped. I saw a lot of praise for it. It's cool if you have time to play it, but it's definitely not a requirement. All that being said, I am really kind of shocked at how much I enjoyed Life is Strange 2. I did not expect it to become my favorite Life is Strange game. I did not expect my favorite to actually be Life is Strange 2, considering how little I have heard about it. And also, you know, I want to play as a girl in these games. So I wasn't necessarily, like, jumping out of my chair, oh, I can't wait to play Life is Strange 2. It really had every reason for me not to be as interested in it. But somehow, some way, man, let's put it this way. This was the hardest I cried for a video game since Xenoblade 3. And Xenoblade is a franchise that, you know, going into Xenoblade 3, I loved that franchise for a very long time. And so it had all that sentimental factor. It had all that emotional weight. Life is Strange 2, it doesn't have that. I'm a new Life is Strange fan. There's no nostalgia here. There's no bias here. It's not even directly, or at least that much directly connected to the other Life is Strange games. It's just its own thing for the most part. So the fact that it made me cry that hard, like, and I tell ya, I really ugly cried. There's multiple endings, a lot more different than I thought, but the one that I got, like, I was satisfied with it. Don't get me wrong. That's the way that I felt like the story should have concluded, but it really got me, man. I still think about it. I still think about this game on a pretty regular basis. I played this back in late July or like early August. I listened to the soundtrack pretty commonly. It's the soundtrack is great, by the way. I think one of the best soundtracks out of all these games. And it was pretty early on too that I got invested. I would say I got invested the fastest with Life is Strange 2. Because usually you have like a slower opening where you really get settled into the community and all the characters. That's not a bad thing. I actually like a slow opening for a lot of games. But the way Life is Strange 2 opens up, it just hits you. We're not going to pretend. We're not going to sugarcoat it. Here we are. It's going to be sad. It's going to be heavy. And you're not going to be ready. And I was like, all right. All right, I'm in. Fuck it, I'm in. The aforementioned feeling of dread, the feeling of nothing matters. But to me, it wasn't in a bad way. To me, it felt appropriate to the story they were telling. It just gives every moment so much more meaning. Every time you do get a lighthearted moment, every time you do get a quiet or peaceful moment, it adds so much more meaning to that because you know it's going to be temporary. You know that's brief. You know there's terrible shit around the corner. But it makes you want to enjoy that moment for as long as it lasts. And I know that sounds so corny. I think the writing is overall the best out of all these games. If that wasn't obvious, I think the writing, even though there are moments that I thought could have been a lot better, on a consistent level, I think it was the best. Even outside the story, they actually build on the mechanics that we all know from this franchise. It actually builds on top of it. It might not be a direct sequel that you might expect it to be, but it is a sequel in the sense that, yeah, these mechanics, we're actually doing something with them. We're actually adding to them. We're not just gonna do the same old thing. There's a lot more like dialogue options. You have like 3 choices instead of just 2 whenever there's a big moment like that. There's a lot of interactions with Daniel that you can do. They really do just make sure you get as much interactivity as you can. It doesn't feel like a walking simulator. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm just point and click adventure. No, they do as much as they can to make you feel you are interacting with this world. And they even have a money mechanic. That surprised me. They even had a mechanic where you have to manage your money. And that also just added to the anxiety and just the fear of it all. I just can't reiterate enough how much respect, how much adoration for Life is Strange 2. I think it's the best Life is Strange game. But it's not for everyone. Which is why I labeled the tiers differently. S tier is must plays. S plus is just my personal favorite. I'm not calling Life is Strange 2 a must play because some people are just not going to jive with it. And that's totally fine. This was the last Life is Strange game Don't Nod made. They went out with a banger, in my opinion. The next game isn't a Life is Strange game. Or at least, it isn't a Life is Strange game by name. But basically it is. The way it plays, the type of stories it's telling, the type of themes, the supernatural. Yeah, it's pretty much a Life is Strange game. So I guess technically, this was Don't Nod's actual last quote-unquote Life is Strange game. As far as we know. Maybe the upcoming game will have that too. Tell Me Why is interesting. First and foremost, this game is free every Pride Month. So I would just say to try it out because of that. I mean, you had me at free. That's a big plus by itself. Considering Don't Nod made Life is Strange 1 and 2, which are the top 2 as of this moment, there's just a lot more expectations going in, and unfortunately, it does not live up to those expectations. It doesn't really come close in my opinion. I think the story may be a little bit better overall than Before the Storm, but it doesn't have those vibes. It's still nice, it's still pleasant, but it doesn't have those vibes that Before the Storm has. At least for me, the way it wrapped up was a lot less satisfying. Like, I see what they were going for. It's these pair of twins, they have this twin telepathy that manifests through the supernatural, and they're trying to solve the mystery of their mother's murder. And it starts off in a really impactful way. Like, when I saw the opening for this game, I'm like, oh snap, here we go. This is about to be crazy. It's a little bit misleading. It makes you think it's going to be a lot more crazy than it actually is. That's part of why it disappointed me. I don't know, I just don't think it's as charming. I don't think it doesn't have as much personality. I like that one of the protagonists is a trans man. I think that's awesome. As a whole, the mystery isn't that satisfying in my opinion, and that's a big blow to these games that are so focused on their narratives. And sometimes when you have a weaker story like Before the Storm and Tell Me Why, sometimes the vibes can carry you, but like I said, not quite there. The one thing it does do great though, besides the portrayal of trans people, is the portrayal of trauma and PTSD, because you have the brother that has the trans representation there. But then the sister, that's where you see a lot of the PTSD, essentially. And so you have these two characters, what they're representing, they just nailed it, right? It's just the story that they're in just kind of lets them down a little bit, you know? Oh yeah, there's several times where you just have to wait which I guess is supposed to be like, oh yeah, just like, enjoy the scenery with your little friend or your sibling. It hops between each sibling, which is cool, but it also affects the pacing. This is already a short game, so when you have those moments where like nothing happens, you feel that a lot more. This was the game where I used a guide the most. I used a guide a lot of times. And tell me why. And part of that is because I wanted to binge it, so I wanted to make sure that I beat it. But also, there's like certain puzzles or certain things you have to do that aren't the best. Even aside from those puzzles, the gameplay, I would say, is the most tame. Even though you have that supernatural element with the twins, it's pretty basic. I would say even Chloe's backtalk had a lot more oomph to it. It sounds harsh, but I'd probably put it in C tier. Meh. Because what it does good is really good. But if it wasn't free, if it wasn't free every Pride Month, I would not recommend it. That's the problem. That's why it's in meh tier. Now we got Life is Strange True Colors. I made a video about this. You should just go watch that video instead, I'll be honest. I don't want to speak too much about it right now because I made that video and I would just be regurgitating a lot of what I said. Being able to play as an Asian queer who just had so many... we related in so many specific ways that it was kind of surreal. And so that, I will admit, there's some bias there. Just that sentimental value. But even still, it's such a remarkable game in terms of the setting, in terms of the characters, in terms of the slice of life, which I know is going to turn off some people because most of these games have some sort of mystery. And there is a mystery in this game, but it's not great. Really, it's just the finale. The finale is quite rushed. I felt like it needed another hour or two. It's, it's not the most climatic, to say the least. And before I forget, this game did come out at full price, $60, and it's also one of the shortest Life is Strange games. Like, you could beat it in 10 hours. Considering there's not much gameplay compared to other games, and it's only 10 hours, should not have been $60. They learned their lessons with Double Exposure. Double Exposure was only $50. The bright side is that nowadays, you can find True Colors so commonly, so frequently, for like $20. I mentioned before the Storm has a weaker story to me, but the vibes are all there. That is even more so with True Colors. True Colors has such a good vibe. It's so nice. It's such a nice game to be in, a nice game to play, a nice community to be with. Again, this is so different from other Life is Strange games, where there are likable characters, but there's also really despicable ones. Life is Strange 1, I hated half those characters, but True Colors, for the most part, is just good vibes. There is trauma in there is sadness, there are some very real moments. They handle grief so well, and that's one of the strongest points of the writing. But even outside of that, it's just a nice game to be in. I know it's such a simple way to put it, such a dumb way to put it, but I could boot it up right now and I could just feel warm inside. Alex Chen is the GOAT. She's my favorite protagonist out of all these games. One of my favorite protagonists of all time. She is such a well-realized character. She's so good, and she's so inspirational. I love her. I'm going to start crying if I talk more. So I would put this in S tier, because here's the thing. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That's mainly if you come into this expecting like a Life is Strange 1, or even a Life is Strange 2. I think for a newcomer, like myself, who did not have those expectations, then you can fully enjoy True Colors the way it is. Even if you are one of those people who really emphasize the mystery and the darkness and the trauma and all that, you might be a little underwhelmed by True Colors, but as long as you accept it for what it is, as long as you understand that, yeah, okay, this is a different vibe, but it's still really good. It's still so charming. It's still effective. It still tackles those kind of themes that you'd expect from these games in a really brilliant way. As long as you accept those things, or if you're just a newcomer, I would consider it a must-play. It's not my favorite, literally only because of the rushed finale. If the finale was done better, this would still be my favorite game Also, if you didn't know, and if you don't want to watch that video I made, the supernatural power is empathy, so you could feel other people's emotions, and that comes along with their thoughts. Really effective in what they're trying to convey, which is just processing grief. They make sure you know that, like, it's a process for sure. They do that really well with the supernatural powers. This is it. The newest Life is Strange game that I've already placed in D tier, but let's hold the phone. Don't take that too seriously yet. Why is it in D tier? Why was I so quick to let you know that it was going to be low on this tier list? Well, let's start with the reveal for this game. From the moment they revealed Max, I was one of the many people who felt skeptical. It felt like there were two halves when this game was revealed. Half the people were just happy to play as Max, and that's totally fine and valid. The other half just felt like, why? Like, why are we playing as Max again? Did she really need another story? If there was any protagonist that I felt warranted, justified to come back, it would have been Alex. Because there's so much there that you can still explore. Life is Strange 1 is pretty conclusive. I mean, the trailer by itself starts with the sentence, paraphrasing here, "I swore I'd never use these powers again." So, like, we're just asking ourselves, are they really going to be able to justify this game's existence? Outside of pandering, outside of fan service, is there going to be a story worthy of being the next game starring Max? I was really excited going into this game, just because this is the first time I get to feel like a fan who's being rewarded. This is the first time that I get to play a new Life is Strange game with everybody else. That alone was so exciting to me. And then I saw those reviews, and I was still excited. I was still excited because, you know what? I don't need this game to have a great story. I know I just said that thing about does it justify Max, but if it's just a fan service game and it's just pleasant to go through, if it gives me Before the Storm vibes, that's fine. That's all I need. I'm just happy to be a new Life is Strange fan, getting to play a new entry for the first time. And so I played the game. I streamed it, for those who didn't see. First two chapters were so cozy. It wasn't perfect. Right off the bat, the setting wasn't nearly as fleshed out or as affable and likable as the previous ones. And that one really confused me because they had just made True Colors, a game where its setting and characters are a 10 out of 10. Right? So just kind of going from that to the campus in Double Exposure, it felt like night and day. It felt like, where'd they go wrong? Like, what happens? It wasn't terrible. Don't get me wrong. I was still enjoying the game. Just being Max is fun. Just being Max. I felt weird to say it because I knew Max from the first game when she was younger, but Max is hot. Max is hot in this game, but more importantly, she is very adorably awkward. If you go into this game just because you want to play as Max, just because you like that character, then you'll have a pleasant time. At this point, it just kind of felt to me like I felt about Before the Storm. Story's alright, but I'm here mostly because I enjoy playing as his protagonist. Moses too, by the way, shout out to Moses. But then, Chapter 3 came along, and they introduced some things that I just wasn't sure about. And I was thinking about those reviews, and I was thinking, this might be a sign of why a lot of people are upset about this game, or just not having a high opinion of this game. It's not just the reviews, it's also a lot of the fan base right now. And so I thought to myself, okay, but I'm still enjoying it. There's more things that I don't like, but I'm still enjoying it. I mean, how bad can this get? And then we got to Chapter 4 and 5. And I have never seen a game, I have never experienced a story that fell off a cliff harder than this game story did. It fell off a cliff so abruptly. It fell off a cliff faster than I could say fuck. The story is awful. in the latter half of this game. If you focus on that first half, it's not an amazing Life is Strange game. It's not even a great one, but it's pleasant. Then you get to that second half, and it just becomes something that I wish, as well as many other fans, wish did not exist. It's just... I'm getting overwhelmed just thinking about my disappointment. You can say this about the whole game, but especially in the latter half, the writing is just so clumsy. It's just so jumbled, it's messy, and I wasn't that surprised at first because I heard about the premise. I heard that there was going to be different timelines. I was not the biggest fan of that because I was worried. Okay, yeah, if you're dealing with all these different timelines, that could lead to some messy writing. But then when I started playing the game, I found out, oh, it's only 2 timelines, it's fine. But no, even with 2 timelines, for some reason, the story is just so convoluted and so confusing and just terribly placed, terribly scripted. It's shockingly bad. If I had to amalgamize all of this game's flaws into one sensation, this one feeling, this one emotion, it wouldn't be disappointment. It would be desperation. Not my desperation. Not any player's desperation. I'm talking about the people who were in charge of this game. I'm talking about Square Enix and whoever else was at the top making these decisions. I want to emphasize this. I am not trying to diss the writers. I'm not trying to diss the actual talent who are busting their ass to make this game happen. Because the reality is, this game is just conceptually flawed. It was just flawed from the beginning. Its direction, its existence is flawed. And I know that's just so ambiguous without going into spoilers. To sum it up as best as I can, it's like, okay, just imagine this boardroom of executives just rubbing their hands together, just licking their chapped lips. They're just, oh, we got a fantastic idea. This is how we bring Life is Strange back. Because Life is Strange has never been as popular as that first game. And with how common True Colors is on sale, maybe it didn't sell that well. I don't know for sure, but that's the impression I get. And so how do we bounce back? How do we bounce back from that? Oh, here we go. Let's bring back Max. Yeah, that protagonist from that game everybody loves and everyone bought. Let's bring her back. And if it was just that, it would have been fine. But the desperation continues. They take a direction in the story in a way that just feels so tone deaf to why people love this franchise. If you're a Life is Strange fan, or maybe you feel this yourself, you've probably heard the sentiments of Life is Strange is better the more supernatural it is. So Life is Strange 1, the rewind mechanic, that power is just so crucial to the gameplay, to the puzzles, to the way that story progresses. Other Life is Strange games aren't as heavy in the supernatural as Life is Strange 1, and thus, for a lot of people, they didn't have the same impact. The problem is, whoever was in charge interpreted that in the worst possible way. Because the biggest mistake in the direction of this game was putting more emphasis on the superpowers. That's why it's so convoluted. That's why it's so confusing. That's why there's not much substance. It's just all focused on how wacky the superpowers are. It's like they heard all those fans saying that. They saw Life is Strange 1 and how crazy it gets with its powers. And they said, you know what? That's what people love about the franchise. It's not the community. It's not the setting. It's not the characters. It's not the drama. It's not the story. It's not the mystery. It's not any of that. It's the superpowers. That's what they want more of. That's why they love Life is Strange. And so let's double down on that. That is what happens in the most broad, ambiguous way in Life is Strange Double Exposure. They prioritize the completely wrong things. Just a fundamental misunderstanding of why people actually love this franchise. Because even though The superpowers are important. I'm not saying they're not important. They are important. But at the end of the day, people love these games. They impact so many people, so many lives because of the stories they tell, because of the characters. Not because, whoa, look at these powers. Look how crazy this is. No. It's just such a tone-deaf misunderstanding of their own franchise, of their own fan base. It reminds me, which I'm already getting PTSD just thinking about it, it reminds me of Bayonetta 3. I would say Bayonetta 3 and Double Exposure are the two most disappointing games I have played as an adult. And they're similar in that their ending is just so, it's like almost laughably bad. It's bad in a way where you're thinking to yourself as it's happening, why did they think this was a good idea? Why did they think anybody wanted this? Who else are they doing this for other than themselves? Is this just some sick, self-indulgent thing? Some sort of fantasy that they want to fulfill out? Like, oh, what if this happened? That'd be cool. At least I think so, haha. That's how it feels. That's how it felt when I played Bayo 3 and got to that ending, and that's how I felt here. And there's just such a false confidence. I think that's the frustrating part, and also the laughable part. They portray it with such confidence. We know you're loving this. You're gonna be so excited for the future of this franchise. Isn't this so cool? They're beeping outside because they're so upset about that false confidence, that fake confidence, that just foolish. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been confident in whatever story they were telling, but just with how wrong it is, it just gives me no confidence in whoever's in charge and whoever's deciding what stories they should tell for this franchise going further. And I know that sounds so pessimistic and so cynical, but that's just how alarming the narrative direction was in this game. Even the last scene, the final thing you see before it fades back to the title screen, it feels like a Marvel film. It feels like they looked at Life is Strange 1 and they looked at Marvel films. What do they have in common? The superpowers. So let's focus all on that. It's just such superficial thinking. That's why it's so offensive. That's why so many people are disappointed and upset. It's not just the fact that it's underwhelming. It's not just the fact that it's bad. It's the fact that it gives off ignorance thinking, ignorance leaders, whoever's in charge. It just feels so disconnected from what people actually think. So disappointing. But like I said, it's not disappointing in terms of the main feeling. The main feeling is that desperation. It's like their own vision overshadowed your own feelings. You may feel disappointed, but trust me, your disappointment is nowhere near their amount of desperation. From the beginning, they brought Max back because they were so desperate for this game to sell. And it worked. I've got to admit, it worked. But then, it ended with another display of their desperation. They might as well just change the title to Life is Strange Double Desperation. It's just, without getting too much into it, it feels like an advertisement. It feels like an advertisement for their vision. This is what we think Life is Strange should be. This is what we think will make us more money. This is an advertisement for that. It's barely a mystery. It's barely a story. It's a self-indulgent, oblivious, tone-deaf advertisement for what Life is Strange is unfortunately likely to become. If it keeps going the way that it did in this game, I am not happy. If you couldn't tell. Last thing I'll say, oh my gosh. There's all those stupid digital deluxe and ultimate editions, cat DLC, whatever. Another indication of their greed, of their desperation. You get like the early access to the first 2 chapters. Imagine that! The first 2 chapters are actually good. Imagine playing that early access, playing those first 2 chapters, being reasonably excited, and then the game finally comes out, and you spend all that money to have this bad impression of the game. Bad as in, like, it's wrong. I'm just venting at this point, dude. And I don't want to undermine the people who do enjoy the game. If you love Max that much, and if you're willing to ignore, and I do mean ignore, unresolved mysteries and all that, if you're willing to ignore all that, there is fun to be had. I'm not saying this game is all bad. It's offensively misguided. That's why I blame the people up top. Like, I just can't imagine. I have no proof. I'm not saying I have any proof. But no matter who it was, that's just the feeling you get playing the game. And that's what's most important. Even if there was a passionate team of writers, if it feels corporate, if it feels desperate, if it feels like an advertisement, then it might as well be one. Well, on that sad note, that is how my Life is Strange journey concluded, and that is how this tier list is going to conclude. You can see that there's an empty tier here. I definitely think I should have... I kind of want to leave it there. Honestly, I do think there's a gap, because every game above that gap is like Life is Strange at its best. Even if there are certain things you don't like, certain things that are weaker, they really embody what the franchise is. Whereas you get the C tier, where it's not even really truly a Life is Strange game, but it is trying to be one, but it just doesn't have that personality or the payoff. And then you get even lower than that, you have a broken game on release in a game that caused broken hearts. So, honestly, I'd put Double Exposure below. At least those remasters are remastering good games. Good games are in there. You just gotta find it a little. You gotta avoid those bugs. There are people who have played them with minimum bugs. It depends on... It's random, right? It's not really anybody's fault if you get bugs. It's just happenstance. And that's why it sucks. But, hey, you might get lucky. You might get lucky, and you know what? I'm bumping it up. I'm bumping it up to meh, simply because I know for a fact there are a good amount of people who did play those versions with minimum bugs. I know this. It would be selfish for me to say nah, because that's me saying don't buy this at any cost. But the cost is very appealing. It's like, what, 20 bucks or 30 bucks for 2 good games? That's pretty good. I think that deal alone bumps it up to C tier. Double Exposure deserves to be in D tier alone. How ironic. How ironic. D for desperation. Double desperation. There's a joke somewhere about double Ds, and you might as well make it, because you'll get more happiness out of that than the actual story told in the game. Scathing comments, I know. Thanks everybody for watching this tier list. Trust me, I enjoyed it. Despite those last, 25 plus minutes, I did enjoy this tier list. I still love this franchise. I made this tier list, by the way, so if anyone ends up using it or looking at it, you can thank me later. I had to make my own. Somehow there wasn't a tier list like this. Maybe that's just how discouraged Life is Strange fans are right now. They're so discouraged that they didn't even make a tier. They didn't even make a tier. Oh, anyway, let's move on now.